Welcome, everybody. I'm Ray Mayetta. We have another edition today of our Qualitative Conversation series. We'll be talking with Dr. Cheryl Poth, and more to come on that conversation in just a little bit. I'm Ray Mayetta, president of Research Talk. I am a sociologist, and my primary area of interest is in personal relationships, but that doesn't mean it's all I study by any means. I'm lucky to be guided by brilliant clients and walking through all sorts of works. We are doing a study now on lifelong friendship, which is a follow from work that I did 30 years ago on just friendships and kind of the meaning of friendship for adults. So it's kind of fun to be doing that. And qualitative research is kind of my passion and geeky zone. So it's kind of fun. So I'm going to ask our group to introduce themselves. I have two of my colleagues with me who will then join in a group conversation with Dr. Poth. So, Paul, you mind introducing yourself?
I'm Paul Mihas. I'm a qualitative research and consultant at the Odom Institute at UNC Chapel Hill, and I've also been with Research Talk as a consultant since 2001.
And the Odom Institute is our long-term partner for the summer intensive. Not all 23 of the intensives, but for many of them since 2012. And Paul is our lead liaison there, and also one of our teachers as well. So we're always happy to have him with us. And then Jeff.
Thanks, Ray. Yeah, I'm Jeff Petruzzelli. I've been with Research Talk since 2001 as well, and I'm a qualitative research specialist here.
Thank you, Jeff. All right. So, Cheryl, why don't you go ahead and just give us a couple of sentences bringing to the course. I'm going to mention the title of the course and kind of view your bio in that sense. And after we get a very short 3-sentence bio from you, we'll segue to much more conversation from there. So the title of the course that Cheryl's teaching for us on July 29th, it's a one-day course, is Qualitative Survey Data, Tapping into the Full Potential of Open-Ended Responses. So more on that. So why don't we learn a little bit first about you, Cheryl?
Oh, I'm Cheryl Poth, and I'm at the University of Alberta in Western Canada. And I first became involved with Research Talk as a participant over 20 years ago, taking my first workshop, happened to be in the subject area of mixed methods. And then that actually changed the course of my career. And so 10 years later, I started teaching with Research Talk. And my research interest is around how do you help enhance the quality of different research methods. And so I work in the areas of qualitative research, mixed methods, and quantitative research as well.
Wonderful.
So I'm really happy to be teaching this course. This will be the first time I'm teaching this course at Research Talk. And so I'm really happy to be doing it. And so it's come out of a need that I think I see in the field of folks who are using a survey design, but maybe aren't tapping into the full potential yet of the qualitative answers. And so that's kind of where this course has kind of come from.
And a little bit about, well, I have the word thoughtfulness in mind, but the title and working through titles and all those kinds of things, you're so thorough in kind of packaging your presentation of ideas. So talk a little bit about movement to the creation of the course and the purpose of the title, and well, put it there, and then I know you're going to guide us through lots of different thoughts and stuff with some direction for us, but yeah, start us on the thinking about the growth and the course and choosing a title.
So much of my writing and my teaching comes from things I see in the field. And so I've had folks tell me or ask me, can I, organize a study that is focused around the qualitative open-ended questions? And my answer is always, why can't you? And they often say, well, it's because of the data. I don't know if I have enough data, or I don't have the right data. And I'm like, okay, well, then let's, take a step back and go, maybe then we want to rethink about how are we then asking the questions, and how, maybe even where in the survey are we putting the qualitative questions? Mm-hmm. How are we as researchers presenting the opportunities for folks to actually provide their insights in a qualitative way using a survey design? And when I talk about survey, it doesn't mean that it always has to be written, but that's also, we'll talk through those. It's about the phrasing of questions and allowing folks the space and the opportunity I think a lot about right now we're talking about text, in terms of responses, and perhaps it's an online survey, but it could be an in vivo survey as well, which is a very structured that way. So we can talk about in the course the different modes of doing survey design, the different reasons, and the different ways that you can make your surveys more accessible and maybe even more inviting to different types of participants. I think a lot about how do we reach hard to reach folks? Who doesn't click on I think it's hard now to get people to click on a survey link. And so how do we then change some of those ways of doing things? And maybe in the future, we might even get beyond text. Maybe there's a way where we can embed something else into our survey, whether it's drawing, those kinds of art-based methods. So I hope we get a chance to explore the different possibilities of survey design, of using qualitative work in this course.
I just wanted to inquire a little bit about, but let me start with one thing. The second, I think we'll bring up later. But I love how you said allowing people space and opportunity. And I just wanted to ask you to make sure that we're on the same page. Who are the people, and how do you conceive of space as you put it forward? How would you operationalize space in that context?
Well, I think it's this idea that the way that we craft questions, is sometimes when, I know I've certainly had the experience where I look at a question and I'm like, you're leading me in a particular way. I think this is what response you want. And so I think creating the space is stepping back and creating questions that intentionally invite rich, meaningful, and relevant experiences to be told to you as a researcher.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the ways we can do that is by crafting questions that are aligned with a clear analytic purpose. And when I talk about that, analytic, it does have to do with the second part of the course, which is how we're going to analyze the data that we collect in there. So those two things go together. And then there's some big questions we want to think about. What is the role for the survey in your research? What is the role for the different sections of your survey? What is the role of the different questions in your survey? Are you going to analyze them for individual responses? Are you looking for groups? Are you going to maybe analyze a set of questions together as a way of looking at a particular experience or perspective? And so thinking, it kind of reminds me a lot, of like creating a blueprint for your survey, and then creating those opportunities for asking different questions as we do in survey design, where we even are, we often want to have more than one question that asks, different parts of perhaps a construct if we're looking at.
One of the things that's great is we talk a lot as a scholar instructor team about, teaching these courses and these things and expectations. And one of the things we talk about is folks come in with an expectation of, oh, great, just tell me what to do when and I'll be fine. And, let's return to this idea. We want to think a little bit about some things Paul's been thinking about, but it's interesting that you're presenting this. Well, it's not as neat as what to do when. And I saw as you were talking all sorts of different pathways and implications of those. And it's great to prep people for. This is kind of, it's an interesting piece. There's certain ways people have thought about it. But Paul, we were chatting a bit, actually all the way through, right, Cheryl, in terms of thinking of the course, conceiving of the course, giving you advice as you shape the course. But yeah, Paul, there was part of that conversation you were hoping we could carry further right now.
Sure. I know that in our conversations leading up to this, you've talked about rethinking conventions of doing surveys. And one convention that I notice with analysis is that people will just grab all the responses from one question, and it's like in isolation, right? So I wonder if you could just talk about rethinking conventions and what that means for you in regard to the course.
I think that's a great suggestion. I always worry a little bit about when we take data out of context, in the qualitative end. So I think if we can look at either participants' responses in light of their other responses, I think we can kind of have a little bit more of a maybe a little bit more confidence or a little bit more trustworthiness in the ways that we are systematically analyzing it. And I think that speaks to how we would analyze, a focus group or an interview. So I think we can leverage some of the ways that maybe we already bring these experiences of kind of other methods into it. One of the things that I think survey does is it opens up maybe some folks who maybe either aren't willing or aren't able to participate in other forms of data collection, and it allows folks to do it on their own terms. In that kind of way, if it's if it's a standalone survey and they can do it on their own time, or if it's those kinds of things. So I think it allows us to get a fulsome understanding of something either. And if we decide to do the survey that also includes maybe some quantitative data, we can decide how we want to use those open-ended in concert and conversation with. And I would like to see, if I can, more, and if I could be so bold, the conventions are that often the qualitative in a survey is in complementary to the quantitative. And I would like to see quite a movement right now in the mixed methods world around centering qualitative and using the quantitative as complementary or as so I think the survey actually is something that could be a feasible way of doing this, and something that I haven't seen a whole lot of yet, and that I've been playing around with myself. So I'm excited to see what also possibilities folks might take this in the future as well.
That's kind of fun. It's I want to say disruptive, in,
Mhm.
in a good way, in a polite and useful and thoughtful way. It's a reorientation that is refreshing. So yeah, kind of good movement. You had just said something that ties to a comment you made earlier. Earlier, you had said that you think a lot about issues related to challenges of surveys in general. You were talking about how do you reach people that are hard to reach, and then you were just talking about shaping these opportunities for being a participant in ways that fit for how people work. All of that stuff. What do you when you go, and I'm sure there's like the list of conventions that you're thinking, well, what if we could return and kind of keep brainstorming those? But I was just wondering more on this. How do you do that? How do you reach hard to reach? And I love that you've already indicated it's not simply reach them and say, hey, do you want to do this survey? It's also, this is appealing to you. So yeah, let me invite you to talk more about that.
I wonder if we can get to a place where surveys are more relational, where people can see them as a place where they can share their perspectives in a way that they are listened to, that they are valued, and then we can follow through with as researchers with the reciprocity that we see in qualitative research. So I hear from folks that I don't want to do a survey because I never hear about the answers, and I think that that's a real moment. So again, can we center the people in the survey? And I think what that does is sometimes people think survey has to be a lot of people, a large population, and I think that's one of the conventions that we can begin to disrupt. Maybe it's sometimes there just isn't a large population of the folks we want to hear from. So what if we did an analysis on on the whole population available to us, and it's a small sample? Then I think we have some folks and some populations that are understudied, and I wonder if this might be a way of being able to elevate those voices and those perspectives within our research techniques.
I always think I've done a good deal of quant work in my early career. I once had the nickname Stat Boy. This was back in the 80s when we weren't as conscious of gender terminology. But, and it was always interesting to me to consider what goes through someone's minds when they respond to a survey. And I know from having watched many people and people have talked about it, that they have a conversation with the survey creators, and they'll look at 5 choices and think, I'm kind of sandwiched. I'm not going with either. And then, but also it just, answering the question inspires these visions they have of their own life and all of that stuff. So it seems like you can certainly have someone let you know what choice, but presenting that choice really opens people's minds to experiences that I would think introduces opportunities for all sorts of new content.
And I also think about this idea of, we've been changing some of our conventions. So there was a time when we thought we had to, pilot and do think alouds on survey
Yeah.
and then not use that data. Like that becomes the
Right,
kind of
not
off
using-
to the side.
Yes.
And the idea now for me is, why wouldn't you use that data?
Right.
And then why wouldn't you also, I had this as well experience where I had regret with how I worded something, but I felt fixed that I couldn't change that question. And of course, in my qualitative work, I change the questions of the interviews as they go because they better fit the people which I'm interviewing. So why wouldn't I do that in survey design? It's just because it hasn't been done doesn't mean it shouldn't be done.
Yeah.
And so I think some of that then is also being the change that you want to see in some of the methods.
It's great because when people think mixed methods, and I always think about that term, and it's there. It's but people oftentimes think about mixing results, thinking through, but you're actually talking about mixing principles and logics. Oh, and that's kind of a cool direction to go. I don't know that pathway is how common or popular that pathway is.
And I'm not sure I've seen a lot of abuses, and a little bit of a mix and match of different ways of doing analysis. Why couldn't you do a discursive analysis of survey data? But there's just not a lot of examples out there. Why couldn't you use IPA, analysis to look at survey data? And so I think the other thing that we can do in this course is talk about what are the combinations of analysis with kind of questions that we think could benefit the ways that we literally do surveys, which is looking for patterns within different populations.
And IPA, if you could just define that for folks.
Oh, sorry, interpretive phenomenological analysis. And so there's some great courses that I know are taught by different folks at Research Talk. And so thanks.
We have one coming in the spring, not solely about IPA, but phenomenology and all that. Yeah. It's interesting too, right? To think phenomenology, because if you talk about really thoughtful philosophical ideas about learning, like that's how we gave birth to the whole everything phenomenology. So great choice. Paul, I noticed that as Cheryl was talking, it was kind of, I just want to invite you in. I don't know if there's anything specific, but I know there were lots of confirmation. I saw it through your nonverbal as Cheryl was talking.
Yeah, so I just want to kind of underscore what you said earlier about all the doubts that people have when they get into this realm of the open-ended responses. They think they basically just close the doors on possibilities, right? And you're all about opening these doors. And like you said, the discursive possibility. If there's not a lot of data there, there's still a discursive lens you could use to pull out things. And so there's always something you can do, even with really, really short responses.
I even think about, we often, the convention has been that you ask people to make a choice of selected responses, and then you ask them to tell you about your choice. Mm-hmm. So you're already limiting what people will tell you about. What if you did the opposite and you asked them about an experience as a primer and to tell you something, and then you did a follow-up, which of the following, maps onto that experience you just told us about? It's just a different way of coming at it, and it might fit some ways of some of the problems that we're trying to solve in our research these days better in that way.
And you earlier, Cheryl, you mentioned that the second part of the course is on analysis and these kinds of things. But now, people, I love when there's an open-end response, and it's tell me more. And, like, do you want to add anything? But you're really talking, again, the word disruptive about when we think about that first part is, what is it as you shape that open end? You're really thinking through what are your options and kind of broadening those, aren't you?
Well, and I even wonder you know how sometimes in the selected response you have an other category, what if then you could actually add suggestions for the others? And what we actually are doing there is, we could even help to change and evolve some of our validated instruments over time, because there's always the idea that that the world has changed, and that some of our conceptions and our understandings of the ways that we measure things are shifting. And one of the ways we can do that is by talking about the experiences that they're trying to capture, and figuring out what is being captured by our instruments and what's not.
Right. And the other thing that's interesting in the title is the full potential of open-ended responses. But that's more than simply make sure that you cover all of the different open-ended responses and tell a story of each individually, isn't it? Like, so talk a little bit about your thoughts on the relational interaction of kind of the responses, and thinking more than just one at a time, and the contextual kinds of explorations that are right there and available to you when you're thinking open.
Well, what if you had a few questions that were kind of getting at it in different ways? And then, so it's almost like you're asking like the pieces of it. And then what if you asked a question then that asked folks to bring together their understandings of maybe what they've been primed to kind of talk a little bit about already? How do you see, the experience that you explained, in the previous question now applied to this? And those are often questions that people are like, you can't ask that in a survey. And why can't you? You're actually going after those interactions. And when we think about the ways, that people might talk about complex questions, we're really trying to get at the interaction or the relational things between people, places, things, or experiences. And so I do think that there's maybe some types of questions that we actually could ask where people haven't thought that was possible before.
And, I was also thinking as you were talking about an analysis, so setting up a simple 2x2, or just a matrix with 4 spots, and have, when you're thinking through questions that all kind of are getting to a similar notion, a larger issue, put the 4 responses in one view so you can see, okay, this person. There's also been practices of folks that I've worked with, like Judy Tanner, my dissertation advisor, one of the most brilliant people in the universe, would routinely just read through top to bottom on an interview, her first set of interviews, not all of them, but just to kind of get a feel for what did they, and when people heard that, they're like, what? Just type it in the database and then analyze it. But there are also different ways to interact at different points. Different ways to play. So yeah. Jeff, I just want to check in and see. I know you have an idea for us as we, we'll move toward closing in just a few minutes, but I just want to invite you in. We're kind of been flowing over here.
Yeah, before we close, Cheryl, I was wondering, just thinking about the course that you'll be teaching, what is that going to look like? What do you anticipate people will be doing in the course? What are some takeaways they can expect? So kind of just for someone that's going to take that course, what are the expectations?
So we'll use a series of kind of questions for you to think about. And it doesn't mean that you have to have all the answers, but it might be that some of the questions will be more relevant to the work that you're thinking about or where you're at in your thinking. But I'll ask you to kind of work through them, maybe even with somebody, even online, we will kind of, have some discussions and some kind of, feedback section. So I'm hoping that folks can take something away that will help them move their own work forward. And then also would like us to be thinking about, we'll have some activities around with some examples, and we'll be talking about through, okay, so, in this type of a question, what could be some of the options that what could be some of the different paths that you would take in designing questions for this problem. And so I hope that I will have chosen some problems that resonate with you as well, if you don't have a study that you're working on right now. And I just really want you to engage in the thinking behind this, and then thinking about how it could look. And then hopefully by sharing among our group, then we'll come up with maybe a couple things that, none of us had thought about, because we're all bringing our brains together.
So you had earlier, Paul had asked you about rethinking conventions. And before we close out, I just wanted to see if there was any other, I know you've given lots of thought to that. Is there anything else, any other idea? If not, that's fine.
Well, I think the only other thing I'd think about is we often think that the data has to fit in one place when we start to do analysis. And I think what I would start to say is we can look at even different questions in different ways in different places to answer. And we don't have to think about our survey questions as only answering this one. Maybe, we look at it, in this analysis, and then we look at the same question with a different, and under a different condition, and we see something different out of that. And so I think that could be really interesting to maybe take different perspectives on our data based on what purposes and how we see the data contributing to the different questions that we end up organizing around.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Oh, Jeff, did you want to close this out?
Yeah. So earlier, Cheryl, in relation to designing survey questions, you said be the change you want to see. So let's kind of make a move towards this type of change, and that kind of got me thinking about your commitment to research and qualitative inquiry in general. So just kind of wanted to hear a little bit about kind of what keeps you going in terms of your commitment to qualitative, and what continues to drive you, especially in light of the era that we live in today, where the word research is sort of under attack from all different angles.
I think it's the impact that I see qualitative research on people. And when I think about it, it's for participants having the chance to say what they want to say in the way that they works for them, and maybe the way that the experience or the process we're trying. I think it's important for communities to have their voices elevated. And I also have seen a lot of change where I am about the ways that qualitative research are changing policy and practice. And that's a really exciting piece. So I've been thinking about this, a lot. And this course is my way to contribute and to help folks think about the ways that surveys can play in our research repertoire, and the ways that we can maybe take forward. So I redesigned our survey course, in my faculty. And, thinking about things differently. That's how change happens. One person at a time.
That's great.
Paul, anything else before we give Cheryl the floor to give some final
Well, I just wanted to say how excited I am about this course.
Yeah.
I think that it's exactly what so many people need, and it's been missing for so long.
Yeah, and
I'm really excited to have the chance to do this, and so I invite if this has piqued your interest, I invite you to join us. Well, I promise you, we'll have a good time.
And it's great, Cheryl. I want to just applaud how some people are so bounded by tradition and the ways things have been done, and when they say you can't, they're simply saying, well, that's not the framework that it's been used before. And I love that you're just kind of boldly saying, well, it doesn't mean the others are not allowed and not permitted and wouldn't be fruitful. So it's exciting, to kind of bring people exactly where you just mentioned to, being interested in pursuing. And so it sounds like it's not just learning the concrete, it's opening people to give permission to them to keep kind of thinking about, innovation to the way we back and forth with it with people. Yeah. All right. Well, beautiful. We look forward to July 29th, and we'll be in touch throughout. But yeah, so if people want, we'll in the closing out, we'll give you in the video, we'll have some resources. We'll be back and forth with Cheryl, and she'll share a little bit of some of the highlights of her work that you can take a look at those references if you want. And we look forward to seeing you all on July 29th. But thank you so much for your time, Cheryl, and just keep doing what you're doing. So thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Paul.